Jonathan Carter, CEO of a well-known retail chain, had always taken pride in the fact that his company prioritized customer experience, though he had never truly put himself in their shoes. One evening, after a long meeting, he had a sudden idea: to visit one of the stores in his system unannounced, concealing his identity to experience it firsthand. Dressed in a simple coat with a cap pulled low over his face, he stepped into a small but cozy store, where employees were bustling to serve a steady stream of customers. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. As Jonathan approached the checkout counter, he suddenly stopped in his tracks, caught off guard by an unexpected sight. The cashier was communicating with a customer using sign language. Her hand movements were fluid and natural, accompanied by a warm smile, while the customer, an elderly man who was hearing impaired, responded with expressive gestures, his face lit up with joy. They chatted about the store's promotions, the weather, and at one point, the old man jokingly complained that he had spent too much money that day. The cashier laughed, gently handed him his receipt, and the two shared a moment of genuine warmth. Jonathan stood still, observing, surprised to realize that he had never mandated employees to learn sign language. His eyes fell on the name tag she wore, Emma. When it was his turn to pay, curiosity got the better of him, and he asked, "When did you learn sign language?" Emma hesitated for a moment, then smiled and replied, "I've known it since I was a child. My mother is deaf, and I wanted to communicate with her easily. Here, I meet many customers like her, and I just want them to feel comfortable while shopping." Emma's simple words struck Jonathan deeply. He had always emphasized a welcoming environment in his company, yet it was employees like Emma who had turned that vision into reality without being asked. Leaving the store, Jonathan carried a new idea with him. The next day, during a board meeting, he shared Emma's story and proposed a major change, implementing sign language training for employees across all branches. Not just as a business strategy, but to ensure every customer felt genuinely cared for, just as Emma had done. A few days later, Emma received an invitation to the company's headquarters. She was surprised to learn that the CEO wanted to meet her. When Jonathan entered the meeting room, he smiled and raised his hands, signing, "Thank you for inspiring us." Emma's eyes widened in astonishment before she broke into laughter and signed back, "Thank you for letting me do what I love." Just a few weeks after the sign language training program was implemented, a small yet profoundly meaningful event took place, one that left a deep impression on Emma and those who witnessed it. On a drizzly afternoon, Emma stood behind the checkout counter, her gaze absent-mindedly following the people passing by. The store was quieter than usual that day, with only the soft tapping of rain against the glass roof breaking the silence. Suddenly, the door swung open, and a middle-aged woman stepped in. She wore a faded gray coat, her damp hair clinging to her face, and she clutched a worn-out fabric bag tightly in her arms. She hesitated near the entrance, her eyes flickering with uncertainty, as if struggling with herself over whether to take another step forward. As she approached the counter, Emma immediately noticed something different. The woman's hands trembled as she placed a carton of milk on the counter, her gaze avoiding eye contact, her lips moving without producing a sound. These were the familiar signs Emma had learned during her training, the body language of someone who was deaf. Without hesitation, she offered a gentle smile, raised her hands, and signed, "How can I help you?" The woman froze, her eyes widening in disbelief. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Then suddenly, she grasped Emma's hands, her frail fingers tightening with a trembling force that conveyed more than words ever could. Her eyes welled up with tears, and soon, they spilled down her wrinkled cheeks. She tried to speak, but only choked. Broken sounds escaped her lips. After a while, she slowly raised her hands and signed, "Thank you. It's been so long since I've bought something without feeling invisible." The weight of those words struck Emma like a blade to the heart. She swallowed hard, giving the woman's hand a gentle squeeze, hoping to send warmth through that simple touch. "I'm so happy I could help," she signed back, her emotions threatening to spill over. When the transaction was complete, the woman didn't leave right away. She stood there, still holding the carton of milk, her gaze lingering on Emma as if trying to etch her face into memory. Then, she turned and walked toward the door, but just before stepping out, she glanced back one last time. Her smile was faint but filled with emotion, a smile of gratitude, of a quiet joy she had long forgotten. That evening, after her shift ended, Emma sat alone on the bench outside the store, pulling her coat tighter against the rain. Her mind lingered on the woman, on her eyes, on the weight of that handshake. Her phone suddenly vibrated. A message from an unknown number flashed on the screen. It was Jonathan. "Today, I witnessed the miracle you created. I stood in the corner of the store and saw everything. Thank you for helping me realize that kindness is not just a policy written on paper. It comes from the heart. You made me question whether I've truly done enough." Emma read the message, and silent tears fell. She smiled, not because of the praise, but because she knew she had touched something far greater than just her job, the connection between human beings. But what she didn't know was that this story wasn't over yet. The next day, when Emma arrived for her shift, she found an envelope placed on the counter with her name on it. Inside was a handwritten letter, the handwriting shaky but clear. "Dear child, I am the woman from yesterday. My name is Min. I have lived for 20 years without hearing a single sound, and every time I go shopping, I feel like I don't exist. But you made me feel like a person, not just a shadow. Thank you, not just for yesterday, but for giving me the courage to step outside again. This is a small gift from me." Inside the envelope was a simple fabric bracelet, handcrafted with delicate, intricate weaving. Emma held it in her hands, watching as tears fell onto her skin. Without hesitation, she slipped it onto her wrist, feeling as if she were carrying a part of Min's story with her. Meanwhile, in an office just a few blocks from the store, Jonathan sat at his desk, holding a report on the training program. But his mind wasn't on the numbers. He kept thinking about the middle-aged woman from yesterday, about Emma's smile, and he wondered, if a small act can change someone's life, then what am I waiting for? Why am I not doing more? He picked up his phone and sent another message to Emma. "Would you like to help me build something bigger? Not just a store, but a place where everyone is truly seen." Emma read the message, her heart pounding. She looked at the bracelet on her wrist, thinking about Min, about all the others out there still waiting to be seen. She typed back a single word, "Yes." One day, as Emma was working the register at the convenience store, she found herself in an unexpected situation. She was using sign language to communicate with a deaf customer, carefully following their gestures as they patiently signed what they needed. Emma's warm smile never faded, and her hands moved swiftly, ensuring the customer felt at ease. But the peaceful moment didn't last. A middle-aged man standing right behind them in line crossed his arms, his face twisted with irritation. He shook his head and suddenly spoke, his sharp voice cutting through the quiet atmosphere of the store. "Why are you wasting time on this? Just focus on checking people out. Stop putting on a show." Emma froze, her hands suspended mid-air. She could feel the weight of every gaze in the store turning toward her. Heat surged through her veins, but she took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. With a tight-lipped smile, she continued signing to the deaf customer, finishing his transaction professionally. But the man behind him wasn't done. He stepped closer, his tone growing more aggressive. "Who even uses sign language these days? They can just write it down, can't they? You're slowing down the whole line. Look around, people are waiting because of this pointless nonsense." The atmosphere in the store became suffocating. Customers began murmuring, some nodded in agreement with the man, while others shook their heads in silent disapproval. The rhythmic beeping of the barcode scanner filled the tense silence, but it couldn't drown out the heavy pressure bearing down on Emma's shoulders. She swallowed down her anger, her hands trembling slightly as she placed the bagged items on the counter. With a voice that was soft yet firm, she replied, "I just want to make my customers feel comfortable. This isn't about speed, it's about care." The man let out a sharp, mocking laugh. He took another step forward, jabbing a finger at Emma's face. His voice grew louder, almost a snarl. "Care? Who do you think you are, lecturing people? You're just a lowly cashier. Just do your job and stop pretending to care. I don't have time for this fake kindness." The crowd stirred. An elderly woman muttered something about young people lacking patience these days, while a young man behind her sighed and murmured, "It's just a few seconds. Is that really such a big deal?" Emma's heart pounded. Tears threatened to spill, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't let him see her break. Then, suddenly, a deep, cold voice cut through the tension. "I think she's doing an excellent job. If you don't like waiting, you're welcome to go to another register. Or better yet, leave." All eyes turned to the speaker. Jonathan stood there, tall, arms crossed, eyes sharp as steel, staring straight at the middle-aged man. He wore a simple jacket, blending in with the crowd, and no one realized he was the CEO of the entire retail chain. But his voice carried a quiet authority, a command that left no room for argument. The man hesitated, his mouth opening as if to argue, but Jonathan's unwavering gaze made him falter. He grumbled something under his breath, then spun on his heel and stomped toward the exit, muttering a final remark. "Bunch of time wasters." The store fell silent for a few seconds, as if everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Jonathan slowly stepped toward the counter, his gaze softening as it met Emma's. She stood there, her breaths unsteady, fingers gripping the edge of the counter to keep herself composed. He gave her a slight nod, his deep voice steady and warm. "Thank you for not giving up on what's right. Not everyone has the courage to do that." Emma looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. For a brief moment, her heart seemed to stop. A mix of emotions, confusion, gratitude, disbelief, rushed through her, leaving her at a loss for words. She barely managed to stammer, I was just doing my job." Her voice grew smaller, as if even she couldn't believe that her quiet efforts had been noticed. Jonathan, a man known for his cold demeanor and few words, unexpectedly smiled. It wasn't a wide, beaming smile, but a subtle curve of his lips that made his eyes gleam with an unmistakable warmth, something Emma never thought she'd see from him. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his usual composed stride making it seem as though this brief exchange was nothing more than a fleeting moment in his day. But just as he reached the door, he suddenly stopped. A silence stretched through the store, long enough that the background noise seemed to fade into nothing. Then, Jonathan glanced back, his eyes meeting Emma's, deep, steady, and sincere. "I'll remember this. You deserve more than just this counter." His words weren't just a compliment. They were a statement, a recognition Emma had never dared to dream of. And with that, he stepped out of the store, his tall figure disappearing into the misty glass of the rain-kissed door. Emma stood still, her fingers still gripping the pen on the counter, her heart filled with emotion she couldn't quite name. Confusion, pride, and a quiet, fragile hope stirred inside her. She glanced out the window, where the streetlights flickered against the descending night. And somewhere deep inside her, a small flame ignited, a belief that maybe, just maybe, she was meant for something more. And in that moment, Emma understood. Life wasn't just a series of endless days behind the register. It was about unexpected opportunities, quiet acknowledgments, and changes waiting just beyond the horizon.